Before starting this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because after the event I'm going to tell tonight, you will start to think differently about why some villages were wiped off the map. My name is Victor. About 4 years have passed since the events I am about to tell, but my breath still catches for a few seconds whenever my phone rings at night, because I can never forget the call that came that night. Sometimes one can understand the fear in the voice of someone they have known for years, and the moment I answered that phone, I felt that Adrian was truly about to die. But what I didn't know was this: some people do not ask for help. Some things just want to pull you in with them. And that night, we weren't going to save a friend, we were going to a place that was waiting for us. Part 1. No one would have guessed on the first day we met at university that the three of us would become this close, because our characters were completely different from one another. I was more quiet and introverted. Daniel was extremely social and managed to stand out in every environment he entered, and Adrian was the smartest among us. You know how you sometimes feel that certain people are different from the rest? Adrian was exactly like that. He was more successful than everyone in classes, but he never used it to show off. The professors used to say he would achieve great things in the future because he was an incredibly fast thinker. But whenever his family or childhood was mentioned, he would suddenly close up. He especially hated talking about the village where he grew up. We hadn't cared much about it during the first few years, but as time passed, we began to realize this wasn't a normal discomfort because Adrian gave absolutely no details about his village. He would only say he grew up in a small place around the Black Sea region, and then he would immediately change the subject. One night, while sitting in the dorm, when Daniel jokingly said, "You were definitely raised by Jinn," the expression on Adrian's face changed for a few seconds. In that moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, but then he smiled and brushed it off. Still, that reaction stuck in my mind for a long time. The years went by very quickly. As graduation approached, everyone was making plans for their future. Daniel had gotten a job at a big company. I was thinking about a master's degree in the city. Adrian, however, had started acting strangely in recent months because he was constantly talking on the phone but would cut off the conversation when he saw us. Sometimes at night, he would leave the dorm and not return for hours. We asked him what was going on a few times, but he didn't answer. Finally, a few days before graduation, he told us the truth. That evening, the three of us were sitting by the beach. The weather was cold. Adrian watched the sea for a long time without speaking. Then very calmly he said, "I'm going back." "Where?" Daniel asked. "To my village." Hearing this answer shocked both of us because Adrian had been saying for years that he didn't want to return there. Daniel immediately started laughing. "Man, didn't you want to escape from there for years?" he said. "Why are you going back now?" Adrian was silent for a few seconds. Then he threw his cigarette on the ground and crushed it. "My mother and father are calling me," he said. His tone of voice was strange. It was as if he hadn't made this decision himself. "Well, you can come back later anyway," I said. At that moment, Adrian looked at me. The areas under his eyes were tired. It was as if he hadn't slept for days. "I don't know," he said quietly. A bad feeling formed inside me after this answer, but we didn't dwell on it because the rush of graduation had begun. The next day we said our goodbyes. Daniel hugged him and joked, "If you get bored in that village, call us and we'll come get you." Adrian just smiled. But the last sentence he said as he was leaving is still in my ears. "Maybe there is no returning from some places." At the time, I thought it was just a dramatic farewell phrase. Turns out he was warning us. For the first 2 days after Adrian left, everything was normal. We texted occasionally, but he gave short answers. He would write things like, "I'm fine, the village is the same." But on the third night, when my phone rang, everything changed. It was around 3 o'clock. The number was Adrian's. I answered the phone sleepily, but before I could even say hello, I heard his breathing. He was breathing very fast. It was as if he had been running. "Victor," he said in a whisper. There was genuine fear in his voice. "What happened?" I immediately sat up. Adrian couldn't speak for a few seconds. Then, his voice trembling, he continued. "I need you guys," he said. "Please come immediately." "What happened, man?" I said in a panic. Just as he was about to answer, another sound came from the phone. like a strange rumbling coming from far away. It wasn't a human voice, but it felt like people whispering. Adrian suddenly went silent. Then he spoke much more quietly. "They are not letting me go," he said. I shouted. Adrian's voice was almost tearful by now. "Be quick," he said, "because they come out at night." And the phone disconnected. After the phone disconnected, my hand was still at my ear for a few seconds because what I heard didn't quite register in my mind. Adrian was one of the most logical people I had ever seen in my life, and the fear in his voice was not a fear that could be faked. I immediately called Daniel. At first, he answered the phone angrily, but the moment he heard Adrian's name, his voice changed. I told him the entire conversation. After remaining silent for a few seconds, he just said, "We are going." We didn't wait until morning. Daniel took the car. The weather was still dark. As we were leaving the city, there was a strange unease inside me because no matter how logically I tried to think, the last sentence Adrian said on the phone was stuck in my mind. "They come out at night." I didn't know what it meant, but it was certain that it wasn't anything normal. The road was long. As the city lights were left behind, the weather began to change. Although it was supposed to be morning, the sky still looked dark. It was raining lightly, and as we entered the mountain roads, the phone signal began to cut out. Daniel tried to lighten the mood with jokes a few times, but it was clear that he was tense too, because despite normally being someone who talked constantly, he had been silent for hours. "Maybe he had a fight with his family," he said finally. "Maybe his psychology is just messed up." But even he didn't believe it when he said it, because Adrian's voice was still in our ears. In the afternoon, we entered the village road. The road started getting narrower and narrower. There were no other cars around. The forest was extremely dense, and fog was beginning to roll in. After a certain point, the navigation stopped working. It was as if even the map didn't recognize that region. Just as we were starting to think about turning back, we saw someone in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The man was standing right in the middle of the road. The clothes on him were old and torn. His long white beard reached down to his chest. His hair was messy. One of his shoes was missing. But what bothered us the most was his eyes, because the man looked as if he hadn't slept for days. We got out of the car. "Uncle, are you okay?" Daniel asked. The man didn't answer. He just looked at us. As we approached, I noticed how deep the lines on his face were. He looked like someone who had been afraid for years. "We are looking for Adrian," I said. "Adrian Voss." The moment he heard this name, the man's face changed. His eyes widened. Then he slowly nodded his head. "I am his father," he said. His tone of voice was very strange. It was like someone who had forgotten how to speak. Daniel laughed as if relieved. "Good then," he said. "We are his friends. Adrian called us." Man was silent for a few seconds after this sentence. Then he smiled very slowly, but there was no warmth in that smile. "Let me take you home," he said. We got back into the car. The man sat in the front seat. There was a bad smell inside, like something rotten. Daniel gave me a short look, but none of us said anything. While advancing on the village road, the man barely spoke at all. We asked a few times if Adrian was doing well, but he gave short answers. "He's fine. Is waiting for you. They are all waiting for you." When he said the last sentence, a strange chill formed inside me. I hadn't understood who he meant by all. When we arrived at the village, the first thing that caught my attention was the silence. Because in places like this, there is normally some movement besides the sound of dogs, human voices, or the wind, but here there was nothing. In most of the houses, no lights were on. The streets were empty. Because of the fog, we could barely see a few meters ahead. "Does anyone live in this village?" Daniel asked half-jokingly. The man didn't answer. Finally, we stopped in front of an old, large house. It was an old 2-story house with stone walls. The windows were dark, but a faint yellow light was coming from inside. The man opened the door, and at that moment I saw Adrian for the first time. He was standing at the entrance of the door, but as soon as I saw him, I felt that something was wrong inside me, because Adrian looked normal, but his eyes were different. He looked very tired. It was as if he hadn't slept for weeks. But when he saw us, he didn't relax as I expected. He just smiled. "Welcome," he said. Daniel immediately went and hugged him, but Adrian's body was ice cold. It was truly ice cold. I felt it too when I hugged him. It was as if he had stayed out in the snow for hours. We went inside. The house was old but strangely clean. An elderly woman was sitting in the living room. I understood that she was Adrian's mother. When the woman saw us, she slowly stood up. There was a strange calmness on her face. "Finally arrived," she said. The tone in this sentence bothered me because it was as if we weren't guests, but something that was expected. Throughout the evening, we tried to sit and chat, but the environment was extremely tense. Adrian's family was constantly looking at us. Especially his mother never took her eyes off us. Daniel made jokes a few times to soften the atmosphere, but no one laughed. At one point, Adrian stood up. "Let's talk a bit," he said. He took us out of the living room and led us to the old sitting room next door. He closed the door. Then he looked at us for a few seconds without saying anything. And at that moment, the entire expression on his face changed. His smile vanished. In its place came pure fear. "I didn't call you," he said in a whisper. Daniel furrowed his brows. "What are you talking about, man?" Adrian's eyes had filled with tears. I saw his hands shaking. "They called you," he said. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. "Who are they?" I asked. Adrian slowly looked at the door. Then he stepped a bit closer to us and lowered his voice until it was barely audible. "What you see in this house," he said, "is not my family." My heart quickened. Adrian's face had turned stark white by now. "They are not human," he said, and right at that moment, someone slowly knocked on the door from the darkness of the hallway. That slow knocking sound coming to the door changed the air in the room all at once, because the moment Adrian stopped talking, the fear on his face grew even larger. Daniel looked at the door angrily. "Man, what nonsense are you talking about?" he said, whispering. "Is it time for a joke now?" But Adrian's eyes were looking at the door, not at us. It was as if he was afraid of the thing standing there coming inside. The knocking came again, more slowly this time. Knock, knock, knock. Then Adrian's mother's voice was heard. "Children," she said in a soft tone, "dinner is ready." Her voice was normal, but for some reason an indescribable discomfort formed inside me because there was a strange artificiality within the voice. It was like a human voice, but as if it wasn't completely one. It was as if someone was mimicking human speech. Adrian didn't move for a few seconds. Then he turned to us and spoke very quietly. "No matter what happens, do not go outside tonight," he said. "And absolutely do not look at the forest from the window." After these sentences, he opened the door. His mother was standing in the hallway. The woman looked at us with a calm smile on her face, but her eyes never blinked. The moment I noticed this, a shiver went down my spine. Because the woman never closed her eyes while looking at us for a few seconds. We went downstairs. The dinner table had been prepared, but the things on the table looked strange. There was meat, but I couldn't understand what kind of meat it resembled. A heavy smell was coming from it. Even Daniel had lost his appetite. Adrian's father was sitting silently at the head of the table. He spoke without raising his head. "The night will be long," he said. No one answered. Throughout dinner, only the sounds of cutlery were heard. Adrian barely spoke at all. He was constantly looking at the clock. As for me, I had started examining the inside of the house because some things were truly not normal. There were old photos on the walls, but the faces in the photos were strangely blurry. It was as if someone had intentionally distorted the faces. In a few photos, I saw Adrian as a child, but the faces of the people next to him couldn't be distinguished. At one point, a running sound came from the upstairs hallway. We all looked upstairs at the same time, but Adrian's mother smiled. "The wind," she said at that moment. Daniel gave me a short look because both of us were thinking the same thing. There was someone upstairs. After dinner, they showed us the room where we would stay. It was an old guest room on the second floor. As soon as we went inside, Adrian locked the door. Then he closed the curtain. "Tell us what's going on already," I said finally. Adrian couldn't speak for a few seconds. It was as if he was afraid it would become real if he explained it. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and took his face into his hands. "When I came here, everything was normal," he said. "The first day, his voice was trembling. My mother and father welcomed me normally. But when night came, he suddenly stopped." Daniel was starting to get angry. "What happened at night?" Adrian slowly raised his head. "I saw my father in the forest," he said, and Daniel said, "he was in the house at the same time." Silence in the room grew heavy. Adrian continued. "I had gotten up to drink water at night. I looked through the window. Someone was standing at the edge of the forest. It was my father. He was looking at me. I turned ice cold inside. Then I went downstairs, Adrian said, and my father was sitting in the living room. Daniel immediately objected. Maybe it was someone else, but Adrian shook his head. No, he said, because the thing outside, his voice turned almost into a whisper. It was smiling. Right at that moment, a long creaking sound came from downstairs. It was as if someone was dragging a chair heavily. We all went silent. Then the house became completely quiet, and a few seconds later, a footstep was heard from the upstairs hallway. Thud, 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 someone was walking. But the problem was, there was no one else on this floor besides us. When Daniel approached the door, Adrian caught him by his arm. "Don't you dare open it," he said in a panic. The footsteps stopped in front of the door. All of us had held our breath. Then a shadow passed from the gap under the door. It resembled a human shadow, but it was very long, longer than normal. And while moving, it was bending in a strange way. Daniel drew back. For the first time, I saw that he was afraid too. Then a very slow voice came from outside. Adrian. This voice was Adrian's mother's voice, but she was supposed to be downstairs. "Open the door, my son," the voice said. Adrian's face turned stark white. Because at the same time, his mother's laughter was coming from the downstairs floor. When the sound of laughter from downstairs and the voice at the door were heard at the same time, all the hairs on my body stood on end because human logic immediately rejects certain things. But when your brain hears the exact same voice in two places at once, it cannot explain it. Daniel slowly backed away from me and leaned against the wall. All the color had drained from his face. Adrian, on the other hand, was staring at the door. There was helplessness in his eyes. The thing outside the door spoke again. Adrian. This time its voice was more muffled. It was as if someone was trying to imitate his mother's voice but couldn't quite succeed. "Cold, my son." The doorknob began to move very slowly. Click, click, click. Someone was trying to open the door from the outside, but Adrian had locked the door. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. "How can this even be possible, man?" he whispered. Adrian didn't answer because at that moment something else happened. The shape of the shadow under the door had begun to change. At first it was like a human silhouette, but then it elongated and elongated as if crawling on the floor. It wasn't moving like the shadow of a normal human being. Then all of a sudden something black began to appear from under the door. At first I thought it was hair, but it wasn't. They looked like long, thin fingers. They began to curl inward through the gap under the door. Daniel jumped back in fear. My breath caught too because there was no possibility that the thing we were seeing was human. The fingers were too long. It was as if the joints were turned inside out. And as they moved, they made sounds resembling the cracking of bones. Adrian closed his eyes. It was as if he had seen this before. "Don't look," he said, trembling. "They feel that you are afraid." But it was already too late because we couldn't move from fear. The thing outside the door suddenly went silent. The fingers withdrew. The footsteps also faded away. There was a deadly silence inside the room. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Then Adrian's father's voice came from downstairs. "Go to sleep, children." He was calm, as if nothing had happened. Daniel was on the verge of losing his mind by now. "We are leaving," he said immediately. "We are leaving right now." But Adrian shook his head. "You can't get out," he said. "Why?" Daniel shouted. Adrian looked at the window. "Because when the night begins, the road's close." This sentence sounded like pure madness, but because of the fear in the room at that moment, none of us could think logically. Even so, Daniel couldn't resist. He pulled the curtain open, and at that moment we all froze, because the village outside had changed. In the streets that had seemed empty a few hours ago, there were now people. But they were not moving like normal people. They were wandering slowly inside the fog. Some were standing motionless in front of the houses. Some were walking toward the forest. But the most terrifying part was that all of them were looking at our window at the exact same time. We couldn't make out their faces, but we knew they were looking at us. Daniel closed the curtain immediately. "Who are these people?" he whispered. Adrian answered. "They are not human." Then he told us the thing he had never told us about his childhood. This village used to be a normal village years ago. But there was an old place in the forest behind the mountain, a place people were afraid to go. The elders in the village used to say that sounds came from the forest at night, and they would try not to let the children go outside. After a while, disappearances began in the village. First the animals, then the people. But the most terrifying part was this. Some of those who disappeared were returning, only. They weren't returning exactly the same. Adrian's voice was trembling as he said this. My mother woke me up one night, he said. I was 8 years old. She told me not to look out the window, but I looked. He swallowed. My father was standing in front of the house, he said, but at the same time he was sleeping inside. Fear inside me grew because he had said this before. This meant it hadn't just started recently. Then my mother told me the truth, Adrian said. The ones in the forest were mimicking people. Air in the room was ice cold by now. Sometimes they take someone, he said, and something else comes in their place. Daniel shook his head. No, he said, that's not possible. But when Adrian looked at us, there was such genuine fear in his eyes that I understood he wasn't lying. Before I went to university, my mother and father were still normal, he said quietly. But this time when I came back, his voice broke. It wasn't them. Right at that moment, the sound of a chair dragging came from downstairs. Following that, heavy footsteps were heard. Someone was coming up the stairs, thud, thud, thud. But this sound did not resemble a human walk because there was a strange dragging sound between every step. The steps stopped in front of our door. Then a distorted whisper, too low for us to hear from inside, came through. It was as if multiple voices were speaking at the same time, and then, the thing on the other side of the door spoke with Adrian's voice. After the sentence, the truck driver said, we couldn't speak for a few seconds because our brains were still trying to comprehend the things we had experienced. Daniel shouted at the man angrily, saying, what do you mean evacuated? We were there last night. But the old man just kept looking at the steering wheel. His face had turned stark white. After a while, he lit his cigarette. His hand was shaking. I grew up near that village, he said quietly. When we were children, our elders used to tell us not to go near the forest at night. He swallowed. Then people started disappearing. I was listening to him without saying anything because the image of Adrian's last look was still inside me. The man continued. After a while, the government completely evacuated the village, he said. In official records, it passed as a landslide zone, but everyone knew the truth. What truth? I asked in a trembling voice. The man looked at us through the rearview mirror. People who returned from there, he said. They didn't return the same. The inside of the car went silent. When we returned to the city, we thought about telling everything to the police, but no one would believe us. How could they believe it? A village, entities taking human form, and things that changed at night, it sounded like madness. That's why we chose to remain silent. Daniel stayed at my house for a few weeks because both of us were afraid of being left alone. But the real problem was, nothing truly ended after that night. Daniel began to change. At first, he was having nightmares. He would wake up screaming at night. Then he started talking in his sleep. He was constantly repeating the same sentence. Open the door. One night I heard a sound coming from the living room. When I woke up, Daniel was standing in front of the window looking outside. His back was turned to me. I slowly went next to him. What are you doing? I asked. He didn't answer. Then he spoke very slowly. They are still here, he said. I parted the curtain slightly. The street was empty, but just as I was closing the curtain, I saw someone at the entrance of the opposite apartment building. A tall silhouette standing motionless inside the foggy night, and it was looking at me. I closed the curtain immediately. Neither of us could sleep that night. Months passed. Daniel finally moved to another city because he said he couldn't stay here. But before he left, he told me something. One night, a message had come to his phone from Adrian, just a single sentence. When night comes, they still go outside. Problem was, Adrian's phone had been lost in the forest that night, and his line had long been deactivated. When Daniel showed me the message, my hand turned ice cold because the time of the message was exactly 03:17. The exact hour Adrian had first called us. After that day, Daniel and I barely spoke at all, because both of us felt the same thing, as if they would find us again if we spoke. But sometimes a person thinks they have escaped. Last winter, in the middle of the night, my phone rang. The number was hidden. I shouldn't have answered it. I knew this. But I answered it anyway. For the first few seconds, there was only the sound of the wind. Then I heard a whisper coming from very far away. Victor. This was Adrian's voice, but there were other voices behind it. So many voices. They were whispering. They were laughing. Then Adrian spoke again. "We missed you," he said, and right before the phone disconnected, I heard Daniel's voice from behind.